Python and the Holy Grail. Oh my God, no, I don't want to go see another religious film. And then I saw it, and I just blew my mind. It broke up. But anyway, that is one thing that stays in my memory of Clyde. This is the epitaph that I wrote for my brother. It's Clyde Remembrance version 2.0, adjusted for grammar and punctuation, etc. Just one of my notes on here. But the essence of this is that people always, especially religious people, are always thinking, well, you want to live on forever. You want to live on forever. And I go, well, here's what I have to say. Well, way back in the 1950s, Clyde, my brother, and my middle brother and I began singing 3-part harmonies while washing dishes at the kitchen sink, just to give my mom a break from Sunday chores. Well, Mom would have us singing Harvest Moon and just about any song that the Linden sisters had done on the Lawrence Welk show the week before. And this was such a profound effect on me that many years later, in the 1990s, I, along with 3 other guys, formed an a cappella quartet called Zirconian Quartet. Wow. And that was, we sang from 2001. It was the first Saturday after 9/11 in 2001. All the way up until just a couple of years ago, and we're looking at doing some more songs even now. But anyway, we sang for about 20 years and made a little money, but most of all, we had a terrific time doing it. And if I had never had those days washing dishes, it may not have ever happened. Later on, Clyde's interest in journalism and media caught my attention, which eventually led to my interest in visual media, and ultimately about 30-year career in independent video production. Clyde had a most profound effect on my life, and likewise, I'm sure, my life has had an effect on others as well. That's just the way let me rephrase that. That's just the way life works. What we do affects everyone around us, and the effect Clyde had on me lives on. And the same with my mom. Regardless of one's religious orientation or lack thereof, we all live on forever. You can believe that, because that's the truth. Maybe not as one might typically think, but no matter what you do or who you are, we all live on forever in the ones, in the ones we touch, the people we meet, the people we love, everyone. Clyde lives on through the things I learned from him, the joy, the satire, the bad jokes, and more. I will see pieces of Clyde every time I see Monty Python and the Holy Grail. And remember, we must retain our sense of humor. I'll smile, shed a tear, but most of all, I will always remember my life is so much better because of him. The same as my mom affected us in the 1950s. We all affect each other every day that we live. Clyde may have passed this world, but his memory and his very being is still with us here. The laughs, the pain, the joy, the very things we learned from him have become a part of our very existence now. And he will live on in my life, my children's lives, and their children's lives in one form or another, forever. Clyde may have left the building, but he will live on forever in our hearts, our minds, and he will live on in the ones that follow us. You will live on forever. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Jim. So yeah, take nothing for granted, folks. I should mention that the speaking opportunities that you see here, the free thought of the day, the skeptical sidebar, the member story, or the main presentation, they're all available to you if you want to express yourself, help us learn something that you have learned, or share an experience. Our next speaker is Skeptical Sidebar, which will be Jerry Schultz. Let's please give him a hand. He'll need the confidence too, right?
Yeah. Okay, now which one is the one that works on the internet? Because nobody's going to have trouble hearing me. So we can ignore that one. All right. Good afternoon. I'm Jerry Scholze. It's interesting hearing Jim's talk. It reminded me of something I heard on the radio on the way here. On NPR, somebody pointed out that the longest relationships you will have in your life are with siblings. You know, if everybody else, you'll either you meet them earlier or they'll be gone, but siblings are going to be the longest relationship you'll have. Today, I'm going to talk about something that I know nothing about. I'm not an artist. I'm not an art connoisseur. I'm not an art critic. I'm not a chemist. I'm not so I don't really know much about art at all or how to forge art. But what I'm going to talk to you about today is an art forger. I try to read things outside of my field, and I came across a book called Forger's Spell, A True Story of Vermeer, Nazis, and the Greatest Art Hoax of the 20th Century. And this is about Han van Meeren, or Meeren. I listened to, on the internet, I listened to how to pronounce it, and I still don't know. But he was a Dutch artist, and he worked from about 1915 till just after World War II. And I'll explain it just after World War II as I go along. He had a little early success, but generally the critics were rejecting his work, not because he was a horrible painter, but they just said it's unoriginal, overly sentimental, cloyingly sweet, creepily erotic, clumsy, lifeless. So his career began to suffer, so he planned his revenge. Van Meeren decided the best way he could get his revenge was by forging paintings by well-known and respected artists. He experimented with various different ways to prevent the scientific tests of the day from proving his paintings were fake. He used recently invented compounds like Bakelite, an early version of plastic, and then heating it in the oven and doing various things that he did in order to make it authentic and to resist the authentication methods of the day. He would acquire old but inexpensive, bad paintings from the time of Vermeer and the other artists, and he would paint over them or even remove the painting. And once he perfected his strategy, he began painting these Dutch Gold Age masters. Now the thing about these is there were a lot of them, everybody knew what they had painted, but there was one, Johannes Vermeer, that was a great target because his paintings were rare and it was widely believed that there would be additional paintings floating around somewhere that had not been discovered. So, there's his best target. So instead of trying to match a painting, he just simply painted his own Vermeers using the style. He didn't copy, he created his own. Now these art critics, the same people that said his mediocre paintings are no good, loved them, believed that they were Vermeers. There was one particular critic who was very, very well known and respected, and once he said, yeah, this is a real Vermeer, the rest of the art critics fell in line, and he began to make a whole lot of money selling this to a bunch of millionaires. And I think there was an estimate that in today's money, this would be about 30 million bucks that he ultimately managed to collect up. But, this was in Holland, and, the Nazis invaded. So this provided him with a new opportunity. He sold forgeries to Nazis, especially Hermann Goering. There was one painting he sold to Hermann Goering for a bunch of money and a bunch of paintings. Goering fancied himself an art connoisseur. He fancied himself an aficionado, and he wanted a Vermeer of his own. He had found a couple, but Hitler claimed them, so he didn't get them. Now he's getting one that he can be his own. He paid a huge amount of money, and I think they said 137 paintings, most of which were probably real authentic paintings, to get it. Well, of course, nothing goes on forever. The war ends, and then after the war, Van Meeren was caught and arrested for treason. Selling a national treasure, if forgery gets you a year or two in Holland, but selling a national treasure to the enemy, that was treason. That would get you death. And some of you may have seen the Monuments Men movie. Well, these were the people who found it, and they went through the paperwork, and it was pretty easy to trace this provenance back to Van Meeren. Well, what happened was he's arrested, they take him to jail, and he says, look, I didn't sell any national treasures. I painted all those. And the investigator said, bull, well, this is a church, nonsense. He said, I'll show you. Bring me my stuff. I'll paint you a Vermeer right here. And they brought him what he asked for, and he painted a very authentic looking Vermeer with one exception. It's a picture of Jesus lecturing to people, and there's a Bible in picture. Which that proves, of course, that this really wasn't, so nobody would ever mistake it for Vermeer, as if there was any risk of that. But the people who saw it and the people who watched him said, okay, we believe you now. You did paint these. And also during the time that this was going on, he had told them how he did it and how they could maybe x-ray this one, and you might see a painting underneath it, or x-ray. Check this one, you'll see there was some wood. Well, I had to actually cut that frame down. So at my shop, you'll find some of the pieces of wood. They're probably still there, and they were. So the good news was that he ended up, they still said, well, you also cheated a whole bunch of people earlier on, and so he was convicted of that, sentenced to a year. Goering took this rather hardly. He was in jail already. Things weren't looking good for him, and they say, that Vermeer you bought, well, it's fake, and he couldn't believe it. It was, no, it can't be. It can't be. So it just tells you the mindset of some of these people. But the thing about it was that, of course, he never actually served his sentence because he passed away. He had a heart attack. But the very interesting thing about all this, we'll say, Jerry, that's a real interesting story, but what does it have to do with skepticism? And the thing that attracted me to this was skepticism. First, I'm interested in scams. I think some of you may have heard me talk about that before. Second, I've never really understood why the intrinsic value of a painting is greater than what you can see when you look at it. But it is. Identical painting, one of which by a famous master and one of which by a great, technical talented painter, but not. The values are vastly different. I do not understand that. I do know that it's true. I accept that it's true, but it makes no sense to me. What value can a painting have other than its ability to bring joy when you look at it? I don't know. But it is fascinating to me. Today, this scam wouldn't work. It'd be detected in a minute by scientific tests. But you know that this is that old Red Queen problem where, the Red Queen's trying to run away and the other's running against you. You never get ahead of each other. I think that the techniques are out there. There are still people faking paintings today. Another thing is, we don't really know if we caught all the fake Vermeers. There are probably, in collections or in museums, from here to there, a number of Vermeers painted by Han van Meeren. So anyway, that's my story. Thank you.
Thank you, Jerry. So don't overpay for authenticity because it may be an illusion. So today's scheduled speaker is not going to be able to make it. Probably something about that holiday that I was told about. But the good news is we've got a backup plan for you. And maybe of interest, I think. A question of were voters right about the economy? And you may be thinking, well, what do you mean? Well, in the 2024 election, the majority of voters expressed that their main concern was the economy. 85% were extremely worried about inflation's effect on their personal financial situation. And we saw some very different approaches to reaching out to voters from the two candidates for president. And so this article in Politico really caught my attention. It's by a guy named Eugene Ludwig, and his point is that voters were responding to very real economic facts, and that perhaps it was the people who were saying that the economy was strong who lost the election because their message was not in sync with the economic realities faced by regular people. So the gist is that statistics such as the unemployment rate or inflation, they fail to account for economic prosperity or economic inequality. Now this guy's not, I'll tell you what he's not. He's not a conspiracy theorist. He's not saying the government's making up the numbers or there's a conspiracy to falsify inflation to make the regime look good or something like that. He's saying that the numbers are irrelevant, that the ones we select and have used for decades, not really reaching the point. And so who is this guy? He's got a decent background. He was once the comptroller of the currency under President Bill Clinton back in the 90s. And since about 98, he's been in the private sector as a consultant. Got a pretty solid background and has written a book called The Vanishing American Dream, which kind of coincides with his point of view about the statistics. And so, yeah, let's talk about the 2024 election. What did Trump say? He said, like, what, worst economy in history, right? He said, you know, the inflation is out of control and it's all their fault. He said, you are being exploited by the system. And meanwhile, you know, Harris was saying the economy is strong. We've got fast GDP growth. Inflation is coming under control. Unemployment is at 50 years lows. Look at the facts. These are the numbers. You're given this narrative that does not reflect our statistics. And so she just was kind of leaning on the status quo as the administration that brought a lot of prosperity out of the COVID pandemic and recommended, you know, a few programs and subsidies to help the middle class. And so one of these candidates' messages fell completely flat with voters, and it was Harris's. Utterly worse performance than Democrats had in either 2016 or 2020. So what happened here? You know, we can think of some competing hypotheses. Hypothesis one, which most of you have probably heard, is that voters are misled by these narratives of economic decline, when in fact the statistics support a narrative that the economy was doing great and that we were in a great recovery. It was probably about as good as you've ever seen of a recovery after such a severe recession. The other hypothesis, the one that Ludwig is promoting, is that economic statistics don't reflect the actual lived experience of people who are, you know, voters. People in the middle class, for example. Middle class has been declining for decades, and we can measure this. So if you give those voters a overly rosy view of how things are going, that's going to come across as kind of insulting, right? But I won't put words in Ludwig's mouth. Let's say that here's what his point is. Our research revealed that the data collected by the various agencies is largely accurate. Moreover, the people staffing these agencies are talented and well-intended. But the filters used to compute the headline statistics are flawed. As a result, they paint a much rosier picture of reality than bears out on the ground. Okay? So again, not a conspiracy theorist, not saying the numbers are faked, just saying the numbers are irrelevant. These numbers have time and time again suggested to many in Washington that unemployment is low, that wages are growing for middle America, and that to a greater or lesser degree, economic growth is lifting all boats year after year. But when traveling the country, I've encountered something very different. Cities that appeared increasingly seedy, regions that seemed derelict. Driving into the office each day in Washington, I noted a homeless encampment fixated outside the Federal Reserve itself. And then I began to detect a second pattern inside and outside DC alike. Democrats, on the whole, seemed much more inclined to believe what the economic indicators reported. Republicans, by contrast, seemed more inclined to believe what they were seeing with their own two eyes. So you can see these two narratives, these two hypotheses about what happened in the 2024 election, and he's saying that voters were voting with what they see with their own two eyes. But first, let's dive into the numbers that these folks are talking about. Unemployment just absolutely plummeted after COVID. Economic stimulus measures got people spending money. Businesses were reopened probably a little early, and one of the worst declines in history, the fastest shocks, economic shocks in the history of the United States, just sort of ended, just sort of wound up by by 2021, we're well on our way to recovery. So this is by the way, I'm introducing a tool called FRED. And FRED is the Federal Reserve's website where you can pull up all these data sources yourself. Now, the risk that you're going to learn from this presentation is that statistics don't lie, but they can mislead. And so who wouldn't be proud of this performance in the political world, right? This is what they promise you on the campaign trail, right? So why didn't voters reward this? This is a U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics study, 60,000 households per month of the unemployed as a percentage of the labor force. And they define labor force as 16 years or older, reside in a state or DC, not in an institution, not in the military, and you're either employed, unemployed, or not in the labor force. So again, that excludes a lot of people, right? It excludes people who have a disability and can't get to a job, the people who are underemployed, working fast food or whatever while they're trying to get a better job, the people who are earning too little to afford the cost of living. I guarantee if you go down to University Avenue right now, University in Asher, there will be somebody working at least 3 of the 4 roads going into that intersection, trying to panhandle for money. The crazy thing is, a lot of those people have jobs. A lot of them have homes, all right? So they are counted as fully employed, according to the statistics, because of how they would answer that question. Even if they're only able to work, 10 or 8 hours a week, they've got a job. So people discourage workers who have given up on the job search. A lot of talk about people like just losing hope in finding a better job. People who are institutionalized, and for example, our ever-growing prison system, and of course, informal or legal economy workers who have lost their work. So, a lot of people are excluded from that statistic, and so if any of these, exclusion factors grows, that's going to result in a gap between the number who have actually lost their means of employment and then people who show up in the unemployment rate. Going on, Ludwig says, the unemployment number misleads in several ways. First, it counts as unemployed the millions of people who are unwillingly underemployed. As, for example, people work only a few hours each week while searching for a full-time job. It does not take into account many Americans who have been so discouraged that they no longer trying to get a job. And finally, it does not account for the meagerness of any individual's income. The way he writes isn't exactly quotable, but those are the 3 points that he's making. And so that's a big problem with the unemployment rate. You may be employed, but not at all happy about how little you're making, right? Let's talk about consumer prices. Let's talk about inflation. This is the Consumer Price Index, which is the average change over time in the prices paid by urban consumers for a representative basket of consumer goods and services. The Bureau of Labor Statistics also calculates this one. They've got people doing a monthly survey of 94,000 prices and 8,000 rentals. And in this chart, I have set January 1st, 2020 as 100 on the index. So basically what you could buy with $100. And in November 2024, the measure was 122.1 at the time people were voting. So things got 22% more expensive in those 6 years. Or I'm sorry, in those 4 years. A little more than 4 years. So that's pretty fast inflation compared to what we're used to. But another thing with inflation is your earnings go up too, right? People's earnings started going up. And average weekly earnings, hey, that's pretty much what the politicians were promising us too, right? But the fun thing with Fred is that you can overlay the data and see how one factor has changed compared to another. And in this chart, you can see that early in the pandemic, average weekly earnings took a boost, all those government stimulus checks we all received, and it was higher than inflation. But later, the rate of inflation, rose back up, and the stimulus checks ran out. And so you can see right there where that gap closes, that's when the government stimulus programs ended and everybody's income went a little bit lower. So you can see here that actually wage growth went up, and that's great, but inflation in the end ate it all. So here's what the same data looked like if instead of using an index, I chart it as a percentage change in the last 12 months. All right, and this is the same data as that one, just presented as a percentage annual change. And so you can see right there where that red line starts growing faster than the green line about early 2022. Inflation really takes off, and wages don't take off. And all of a sudden, while the red line is above the green, that means that the median person's, or the average person's quality of life is declining. That means they're not able to pay, or not able to buy as much stuff with their same paycheck as they had before, because their paycheck isn't growing as fast as the prices are growing. And then you see the trend reversed. In about May of 2023, the trend reversed, and we reverted back to now wages are growing faster than prices. And that's good, right? We had a problem where prices were growing faster than wages. Now we're back to wages growing faster than prices. But I don't think the average voter was forgiving about that red line being above the green. And that little bitty gap between how wages were growing slightly faster than inflation didn't dig anybody out. And so how about the stock market, right? A lot of people use that as a measure of how well things are going. There was a correction in 2022 due to the Federal Reserve raising interest rates, and it went down a little bit. But overall, during the Biden-Harris administration, it went up. So again, this is what the politicians were promising you, right? And 62% of American adults own stocks. You can have stocks in your brokerage account. Maybe it's part of your 401k or your retirement plan. But stock ownership in general is really correlated with income. And the poor own almost none of the stock market, almost none. It's all really concentrated in the rich and the upper middle class. So this didn't really help your average voter in that, maybe the lower 40%, lower 50% probably of the income distribution, because they didn't own any of this. They didn't get to enjoy the stocks going up over the 4 years. So yeah, to point to this, that's going to fall flat with all those voters, right? And so what the voters see is, lots of people like themselves suffering, lots of people having economic hardship through this time when the numbers are booming. And what the voters experience is most of the people who, even when unemployment is at a 50-year low, 59% of Americans in 2025 don't have enough savings to cover an unexpected $1,000 emergency expense. And so that is, in a nutshell, an anxiety-provoking issue, because you're one water heater away, one hitting the curb with your car away, or one medical bill away from having to go into credit card debt or something, or borrowing money, or getting it from family if you're in that situation. So that's a $1,000 expense. How many could handle a $400 expense? About 37% of Americans lack enough money to cover a $400 expense, and that was in 2022. 18% said the largest expense they could cover with savings was only $100. $100. So, that's what it costs to go to a nice restaurant. To quote the article in Fortune, the 2022 survey found that the self-reported financial well-being was among the lowest levels observed since 2016. And in 2022, 44% of Americans spent more, while just 33% made more. So that's inflation, again, increasing your cost, increasing how much you have to spend, but not really giving you the paycheck in the end from it. So just for fun, I put together an illustration of why income inequality can throw off these numbers. Here I made two imaginary economies with 6 people in them. In the low inequality economy, we've got a range of different incomes for different people, and the average of those incomes is $57,500, and the median is $50,000. Right? So if you're talking about the average, you're probably talking about most of these people. But look at the high inequality economy. The average income in the high inequality economy is $70,833, but the median is only $37,500. And that's the difference between the average and the median. The median is the middle of the range, The average is sum them all together and divide them by the number of them. And so if economic statistics are based on averages, like consumer price index, the average price of a basket of goods, the inflation rate, the average wages, those are all average-based numbers. And so in a high inequality economy, that's going to misrepresent the situation of most of the people. And in that high inequality economy, if you try to tell the 5 people who aren't earning much of anything that they're doing really well because our average has gone up to 70,833, they're not likely to respond positively to that. I don't have a political science degree. I'm not a political genius, obviously, but that's going to fall flat. And Ludwig's point is that this is what happened. We shifted from the low inequality economy, where the average number was relevant, to a high inequality economy where it's not. And this is not some sort of conspiracy theory. It's actually reflected in the data. If you think Forbes is a left-wing mouthpiece, it's not. They're admitting for 50 years the American middle class has been shrinking. The number of poor have increased and the number of rich have increased, and the middle has gone down. So there's a smaller middle class accounting for a smaller share of aggregate income, and a larger group of rich people, larger group of poor. And so again, we're going in a more unequal direction where average statistics don't matter as much. You may be thinking, hey, you know what? I've heard that there's a method to monitor that. The Gini coefficient, right? That's a statistical method to tell how unequal a society is, or how unequal it has become over time. So as this line goes lower, that's a more equal society, more income equality. And as you can see, the United States has gotten much more unequal over time. And for the past 30 years, we've been more unequal than it was in the days of segregation, if you can imagine that. So that's there is a point here, I think. Ludwig goes on to say, the weekly earnings indicator excludes both the unemployed and part-time work. And so, they don't want to mix in somebody who, a teenager who's working 8 hours on Saturday at a fast food restaurant with a full-time professional. They want to have an apples-to-apples comparison, right? Well, so the median wage in the U.S. is $61,900, but if you track everyone, if you include those part-time workers and unemployed job seekers, it's a lot lower. It's about $52,300. So again, it's who you track and who you include or exclude in the statistics that makes the number sound pretty good or pretty bad. And so what we can do is look at real median household income. This is what households are making. And this is adjusted for inflation, right? So we take it down to account for the fact of inflation, so that if your wages went up but inflation went up too, we're not counting that. We're only counting the real change in your purchasing power. And you can see it pretty much flatlined after 2019. There's nobody's getting, much wealthier or poorer. It's just sort of been flat since 2019. And people don't experience that as a gain. That means that you're not getting ahead, you're not gaining. And so if you, as a politician, came out and said, we've got the strongest economy, blah, 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 you're going to fall flat again. Other thing, home prices. During the pandemic, the home price gained almost $100,000, the median home price across the United States. Now, this isn't even an average number that I'm criticizing. This is the median. This is like the middle of the range. So look at that, the house prices, they just went through the roof. And housing is the average person's largest expense category. 30-year mortgage rates, at the same time as house prices were going up, mortgage rates were going up. And so I built this little table and did some little online calculators of what your mortgage payment did. If you bought in January 2018, you paid about $331,800 for a median house in the U.S. You got about a 4% rate, and your payment was about $1,260. In 2024 money, this would have been 1,574, like if you roll that forward to inflation. But then if you look at January 2024, the house price went way up, over $90,000, and the interest rate you'd have to pay went up to like 6.9%. Put those two things together and you get a payment that's $2,251 a month. And so if comparing the inflation adjusted 2018 number with the actual 2024 number, to put them all in the same range, for inflation, the payment still went up 43% to put a roof over your head in those 6 years. Wages at the same time, on nominal wages, not adjusted for inflation, they went up 30%. So you got a 30% rise in wages, 43% rise in the cost of owning a home. And if you think that you can get out of it by renting, well, rents are going up kind of with inflation. But as you can see here, the blue line is the price index for rents only, and the green line is for everything, including rents and everything else. We're now in a situation where rents are rising faster than regular inflation. So renters are feeling it too. The price of property goes up, landlords have to charge more for it to make their money back. It's gonna, keep going up and up. So nobody's really happy about this unless they already own a home and have locked in a low mortgage rate. That leaves behind a whole lot of voters. So if you talk about the net worth of households going up on average, that's their home equity that's gone up of the people who already bought. All the other people who haven't bought, that's a cost to them that you're talking about. Ludwig also has some problems with how inflation is calculated. If you have a modest income, as he calls it, you only purchase a fraction of the 80,000 items that are in the consumer price index. Usually the basics, right? Basic groceries, basic clothes. You're not buying yachts, you're not buying Harley-Davidson motorcycles or RVs or, anything, airfare, that kind of thing. And so if prices for those things go up faster than the luxury items or the optional items, then you're going to see CPI underrepresent the costs that poor people pay. And he modeled an alternative indicator. Now this is always like a red flag to me because there's people who say like, oh, the inflation numbers are faked, and I have this alternative indicator that shows what it would cost when gasoline prices go up and you drive a semi-truck back and forth to work. Okay, but he's focusing on basic necessities and not including any luxury items, and by his calculations, that since 2021, the cost of living for people of modest means has risen 35% faster than the official report of inflation. So that means, getting a third poorer basically than the original statistics show. Well, let's talk about gross domestic product, right? The economy's growing. Like this is inflation adjusted. So this is not just showing that, GDP went up because everything costs more and the amount of transactions is higher. This is adjusted. And again, the line goes up. This is what the, politicians promised us too. But, why would anybody be dissatisfied with that? I don't know, but let's look at it, transform this out of an index into percentages. Same data as a percentage. This is the change over 12 months. And as you can see, we had a big spike after the stimulus checks went out, and there was kind of, frankly, a low bar to rebound from. But then we kind of returned to, about 2.5% annual growth. But Ludwig would say GDP reveals nothing about how the prosperity is shared. If a small slice of the population is rewarded the great bulk of the bounty from economic growth while everyone else remains unenriched, GDP would rise nevertheless. So again, go back to the two little economies that I created with 6 people each. The really unequal economy, if it grows a bit, guess who gets all of the growth? It would be the person whose income accounts for most of the economy, right? And then there's also some demographic factors. Since 2013, Americans with bachelor's degrees or more advanced degrees have seen their well-being improve. And by the and that they've had an additional tenth of adults risen to comfort. Those without high school degrees, by contrast, have seen no real improvement, and geographic disparities widen among similar lines, with places ranging from San Francisco to Boston seeing big jumps in income and prosperity, with places ranging from Youngstown, Ohio to Port Arthur, Texas falling further behind. And this is what voters in those places are seeing with their own eyes, as Ludwig says. They're seeing their towns declining. And, maybe you've seen some of that around here, I don't know. But it's hard to convince those voters in those places that they should be happy because the price of housing went up in New York City, or that the, gross domestic product of Seattle is going through the roof. Well, okay, but that doesn't put any food on my table, right? It doesn't mean that I'm sharing in any of that prosperity. And quite frankly, if a politician comes across as saying that, it kind of sounds like they're trying to con you, right? It sounds like it's disingenuous. So let's go through some quick political implications of what Ludwig is saying. Democrats came across as minimizing the real decrease in well-being among the majority of voters while they celebrated these aggregate averaged economic statistics. Trump's message that we had the worst economy in history, while absolutely not supported by any of the statistics I've gone over, resonated with people who found that they couldn't accumulate savings, found that their living standards were declining over time, and that they were one unexpected expense away from going into debt. So it may not have been true, but it sounded more true to a lot of people. Democrats kind of self-contradicted when they're expressing concerns about inequality, wealth inequality and income inequality, while simultaneously celebrating the improving GDP, inflation, and wages. Well, if those benefits all went to the top, then it made inequality worse, didn't it? So it doesn't make sense to say both things. Voters aren't dumb. They're not going to let statistics convince them that they are prospering, all right? You're not going to say, look, the GDP line went up, so you should be able to afford your apartment just fine, right? That's not how people work, it turns out. So if you want a deeper dive, just kind of introducing Ludwig's ideas to y'all, and it's kind of a good exercise, I think, in statistical literacy. I know that stats are like, oh God, please let me poke my eyeballs out to entertain myself rather than doing this stuff. But as you can see, it's consequential. As you can see, thinking in the wrong terms statistically can swing elections, can cause major disruptions, actually. And so the Ludwig Institute for Sustainable Economic Prosperity, I think it is, LISEP.org. They have a lot of white papers and stuff that go into more detail on their calculations of how this went wrong. And so I guess the moral of the story is don't ever come across as talking down to people who say that they are genuinely suffering because you read that the numbers are going in the right direction. Don't ever tell somebody that it's not actually that bad because of some aggregate average. In a highly unequal economy like we have now and probably going to become even more unequal, then a lot of these statistics are not going to matter to the average person on the street. And if you want a political message that resonates with them, really Trump's approach won the day because it was a superior approach. It came across as more honest, honestly, to people who were in a lower economic status, who had watched their prosperity go away, who had watched their ability to buy a house like their parents had gone away, their ability to get a professional job, to get through college debt-free. All these things are not open to them anymore, and it does not make sense to say that this is a better economy for everyone. So, anyways, anybody have any questions? Got a microphone coming around. I think it turned it on. Yeah.
thing is that, you said something about homeless people that you're not really homeless. Some of them. Yeah, well, basically, that's not a question. I'm sorry, dude.
I was good with the comments.
Anybody else got questions? Yeah, I'm sorry.
But yeah, that's a kind of a new phenomena. In the past, if, like, let's say 15 years ago, if you saw somebody with a sign that says, you know, please help God bless, the usual, that used to mean the person was homeless and had no job. It doesn't mean that anymore, because that may just be a person who is on their day off from a very meanly paid job, and they've walked from their apartment to the corner to raise a little extra funds to make ends meet this month. And that's the new economic reality. And again, that person counts as fully employed. The money they receive from people driving by, that does not count toward GDP. I don't think there's a way that can happen. But I don't know how that would ever make it into the statistic, but what they spend does go into GDP. So when they receive $1 from somebody and then they go and buy something to eat with that dollar, GDP rings up another $1 of sales, and that's another transaction. The economy got bigger. The economy is growing, even as that's the circumstance in which it grew.
So are we helping the economy or by just helping them? Are we helping the economy just by helping them, or they're scamming us? You know, giving them their money, giving them our money just so they can do whatever. Because I heard one time a person told me a story that he gave this person money and he collected almost $400, and instead of him, you know, putting some benefit into it, he went and just bought some liquor.
Yeah, you know, either way, it counts as GDP. If you take your $10 or whatever and you give it to somebody and they spend it on anything, that's $10 of GDP. If you keep your $10 and you go and spend it on whatever you want with it instead, that counts toward GDP. So the economy where nobody is begging on the streets, in terms of that $10, looks the same as the economy where everybody's, you know, begging and kind of giving donations back and forth to each other. So that's the critique of GDP. It's not a wellness measure. Nobody who knows anything about economics would say that it is a wellness measure. Some would say something like median GDP per capita might, you know, or some kind of median wage might better account for living standards and people's ability to work a job and earn a living. But yeah, GDP, it just throws all the transactions into a bucket and says how many transactions of dollars occurred, and that's where we get this multi-trillion-dollar GDP. Also, if you go and you spend $10 at the liquor store, and the liquor store owner goes and spends $10 at the grocery store, and the grocery store, you know, pays a $10 dividend to a shareholder who uses the money to pay for elective surgery. Well, that's 4 transactions of that same $10 bill. It's $40 of GDP. So it doesn't matter what you spend it on, it's just as long as it gets spent. If you want to hurt the economy, if you want to hurt GDP, save your money. Do the personally responsible thing, right? Do the thing that will help you get more prosperous over time, ironically. So the higher the savings rate goes, the slower money is moving through the economy, the less quickly it's getting spent from hand to hand to hand. And so the slower everything is going. If I take my $10 and I, you know, put it in the piggy bank and don't get it out and spend it for another year, it cycles through the economy, you know, just once, the time I was paid my $10 at work or whatever, or, you know, or panhandling. So if I save it, it just goes through once. If I spend it, it goes into a cycle where 10 people spend it before the year is done. Spend it over and over and over again. And so that's what it means to have a strong economy. Everybody is passing money back and forth to each other. We're working, earning it, spending it, earning it, and spending it. And everybody's spending is somebody else's earning, right? So, I mean, for the private sector, or really public sector, you're spending money on taxes, that's somebody else's earnings. So the more of that's going on, that's what GDP is measuring. It doesn't matter who's doing it, for what, or how well off they are. They may be so desperate that they spend every dollar that is put into their hands. And as the pool of people who are more desperate and have to spend every paycheck increases, GDP increases because the rate of spending money is increasing. Any other questions?
Is there research and studies that support the fact that those people standing on the corner might own a home? And what percentage of them might own a home?
I'm sure there is, but I don't have that in front of me. I've encountered information about that before, and I'm not sure where to point you on that. But yeah, that is it is a thing, and it is a lot more common now. I can't tell you exactly where to go. I'd have to do a Google Scholar search to find that information.
Well, are the majority of them needing money, actually?
I think it's safe to assume if they're out there, they need the money, whether they have a job and a house or not, because a lot of people who have a job and housing are, one misstep away from, or one misfortune away from losing their house and losing their job. A lot of times if you lose your house, like you get evicted for, not being able to pay rent, or because your low-income apartment is being bulldozed to build something else. If you're in that situation, then yeah, it would make sense to get out there and do whatever you can to earn a little extra money, because your car broke down and you can't get to work now. And if you don't get it fixed this weekend, you're going to lose your job when you don't show up on Monday. And so the cycle, goes on. A lot of folks who are in that marginal state, in that really on the line between having a job and having a place to live and being homeless and jobless, they can fall off that cliff any moment. So I don't know if it's like I definitely wouldn't say that the people who have already fallen off the cliff and don't have a job or a place to stay are more or less needy than the ones who are just hanging on to the ledge and are at risk of falling off. Because you tend to lose both at the same time. If you don't have a dress, it's real hard to keep a job. If you don't have, facilities that to do laundry and things like that, people will start to notice at work, and that will potentially get you, especially if you're in the service sector and facing customers. If you can't shower and can't do your laundry, you're going to eventually get fired from that job, and it requires a home to do that for the most part. So, yeah, a lot more people basically straddling that line between having a home and a job and being completely out of luck. And you can't tell the difference. There's no way to know. All right, well, thanks everybody. And that wraps up today's monthly meeting. I will remind you all that we've got a range of events going on this week and next. I'm going to get them together after being slow. I believe tomorrow is Pint Night, is that right, Brian?
Yes.
Yes, Pint Night, 7 p.m. at the Flying Saucer tomorrow night. If you want to have a brew and meet up with free thinkers there, that's an option. And if you, let's see. Also, we've got a board meeting on Tuesday. It's on Zoom. You can find all this information on meetup.com. And on the 28th, Monday the 28th, we've got a Zoom meetup that we have. It's on meetup.com if you want to find the link to that. Our first Tuesday get together at American Pie Pizza is May 6th, the first Tuesday of the month. So come on out to American Pie in North Little Rock at 5:30 and join us for dinner and conversation. It's also $2.22 beer night, which is how you beat inflation that I was talking about. And quick reminder that in late July, starting July 26th, there's a NanoCon, Nashville Nuns Conference. If anybody wants to head out to Nashville and have a little summer vacation, that is a fun conference that you might want to attend. So get on meetup.com, find Arkansas Society of Freethinkers, and subscribe to receive updates on events. But other than that, does anyone have any comments or questions?
The American Pie Pizza is going to be on Friday or?
That's the first Tuesday of the month on May 6th. And so that's,
You won't be here.
yeah, so, but the good news is it's kind of every month on the first Tuesday of the month, so.
Cantina?
Yeah, and Cantina is, when?
Second Sunday, Cantina Communion,
Yes,
with quotation marks around communion.
yeah, that's also in May, so if you can't make first Tuesday, go to the second Sunday on the calendar, and we have a Cantina event at Cantina Cinco de Mayo on Stagecoach Road in kind of southwest toward Benton, near Bass Pro Shops. You just take that exit and then hang a left on Stagecoach, and it'll be right there on the right. So that's a fun event too. All right. Well, thank you everybody for coming to visit, and let's hang out and have a snack and enjoy whatever holiday this is.